let's take a minute and talk a little bit about your customer because it can be a fairly varied ecosystem out there. Okay. And if you're going to try to get your way across the valley of death, you need to know what's on the other side. And there is a number of things on the other side of that valley, right? And so if you could whip out your binoculars and look across that valley of death and try to find, which mountain you actually need to scale on the other side. Because there's a bunch of them and they're all somewhat shaped similarly. Okay. And they're similar, but also different because they have different roles, they have different functions, they have different missions, and frankly, not all of them talk to each other all that well, right? There's different groups, there's different factions, different archipelagos, if you will, right? And so what are the key ones you need to think about? There's a bunch of them. Let's talk about the service secretariats, right? So you've got the president, right? The president is the supreme commander of the military. Underneath that president is the secretaries, right? Army, Navy, Air Force, right? Marine Corps doesn't have their own secretary. Space Force doesn't have their own secretary. Army, Navy, Air Force. Those are the three secretaries. Okay. Those are the folks who actually buy stuff, right? So that is the civilian control of the military. The secretariat actually controls the military. The component commands, right? So the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Space Force, and sometimes kind of sort of the Coast Guard, but only during times of war. Really, the Coast Guard's part of the Department of Homeland Security. So really, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Space Force, all under those component commands. So the Air Force has the Space Force, and the Navy Secretariat has the Marine Corps, right? And so those commanders, those components all have 4 stars, right? Those chiefs of staff, if you will, right? That's a different archipelago. And then you've got your major commands, right? These are the places where your actual operational end users are housed, right? So think of the 82nd Airborne Division or the 18th Airborne Corps. Think about, Fleet Forces Command, right? All of these different organizations is where your actual soldier, sailor, airman, marine, guardians, where they're actually organized, where they actually live. And then you talk about your unified combatant commands, right? Or your geographic combatant commands are probably the most relevant to talk about, right? So Central Command, which generally deals with the Middle East, Africa Command, which deals with most of Africa except for the very tippy top near Central Command, Euro, right? EUCOM, European Command, which does obviously all of Europe, Indo-PACOM, Indo-Pacific Command, which does basically all of Asia and into the Pacific, Southern Command, right, which is basically everything south of Texas, and then NORTHCOM, right, Northern Command, which is actually the United States and Canada, right? So those are your combatant commands. The combatant commands are the places where people actually go fight, right? So 18th Airborne Corps, the 82nd Airborne doesn't actually go fight anything, right? They don't have the mission authorities to go and fight a war. The 82nd Airborne is assigned to a combatant command. The combatant command has the authority, directed or granted by the president to actually go fight in their geography, right? So in Ukraine, right, that is the purview of European Command. If you go out to the first or second island chain, right, in the near abroad of China, that's all under Indo-PACOM, right? And so operational forces from the MAJCOMs are assigned to combatant commands to go actually fight and do stuff. SOCOM, everybody likes Special Operations Command, right? Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Rangers, all, Air Force PJs, really cool folks. They're actually a mashup of really your MAJCOM and your COCOM. So, and kind of a component command, sort of, right? So they create their own folks, right? They train, they organize, train, and equip, which is what components do. And then they actually deploy them. So SOCOM has their own theater special operations commands, right? So for every geographic combat command, there is a theater special operations command underneath that supports that combat command and provides those special operations forces. So U.S. Army Special Operations Command creates Green Berets. The Green Berets are then assigned to a theater special operations command to support a geographic combatant command in executing, warfighting authorities. Can get super confusing because each of those groups have kind of different prerogatives. And we're not even talking about Joint Special Operations Command, which is its own thing, Combined Joint Task Forces, which are another thing. We're not even going to get into the Joint Staff or OSD, right? Those are whole other things. We're just going to focus on those kind of primary archipelagos because there's more than enough to talk about with just them.